Hello, my name is Fear Dragon, and I'm here to talk to you guys today about some of the recent things that have been going on with StarCraft 2 as an actual game. Now, as many of you guys already know, Blizzard doesn't really directly support StarCraft anymore. Instead, what we have is a community patch that occasionally comes out. We have bug fixes and balance changes and stuff being proposed by various members of the pro player community, as well as other kind of modders and things along those lines. And while I think that has been really incredible to see the community come together on, it has been noteworthy that a lot of very critical bugs have been introduced that do heavily affect gameplay for not only pro level play, but even just typical ladder players who are normally enjoying the game. Now, before I get into the overall point of this video and more into that kind of specific topic, I want to actually quickly talk about something that is very important to me. A lot of people probably already know this, but I'm kind of like a former software developer, worked in the industry for like a decade. And something that is really, really important in these kind of software development companies and really makes a big difference in overall company culture is this idea of saying that you have a blameless environment and that you're not blaming people, you blame process. When things go wrong, it's not one person's fault. It's not two or three people's fault who let that happen. It's why did we have a process that allows that to happen? How did we allow a process that enables this bug to get pushed into production? And I want to emphasize how important it is that we try and keep this kind of mentality because, first of all, the people who are making a lot of these changes and the people who are sometimes introducing some of these bugs, they're volunteers. They're not getting paid to do any of this. They're doing this because they love the game. They feel like this is an opportunity to contribute. A lot of these potential bugs and things are also coming from a place where they're not just introducing bugs for the sake of it and making haphazard changes. It's more that they are trying to fix other existing, maybe oftentimes smaller bugs, and inadvertently in a very complex code base that we don't really have full context on because all of the people who have context aren't at Blizzard anymore and aren't making the actual changes anymore, are no longer there. And they aren't there to provide that context anymore. So we're left with a code base that has a lot of legacy knowledge that people just don't have anymore. And so in its effort to try and make a positive change, inadvertently, we end up allowing all of these other kind of issues to slip on through. But we should be incredibly grateful to these incredible individuals, these absolute heroes in our community who are willing to try and step up and for absolutely no benefit financially, and frankly, also get a lot of flack because of any potential bugs or things that do come up. They've been receiving a lot of hate, and I want to make it really clear. I don't want to blame any people in this. I want to talk about process. And with that being said, let's go over some of the examples of bugs that have been introduced that I think are two really critical high-profile ones. What's the timeline for what was happening and why I'm even making this video about why some of these ways that we've been handling our process is a little bit alarming to me in the StarCraft 2 balance update kind of scope of things. So first of all, a lot of people are very, very familiar with the Colossus bug that got introduced. Now, here is kind of the timeline for it, and the TLDR and what the bug was is that Colossus in StarCraft typically have a certain range, and you have an upgrade that upgrades that range. That range will go, when upgraded, in theory, to 9 range. The bug is that for some period of time that we'll go over when I go over the timeline, that upgrade changed it not from 9 or not to 9 range, but to 10 range. So the Colossus simply existed with an additional range that they weren't supposed to have for a period of time. Now, here's the timeline. I did a lot of research to try and find the exact little code commits, thanks to wonderful contributor, Ollie, who has a fantastic GitHub repository that shows a lot of the changes being made, the things that he was working on, etc. But a lot of this is going to be based on his Twitter, various Reddit threads, and various reports. So let's get started. Colossus bug change. First, on April 20th, this is the earliest identifier of where I can find Ollie making a tweet with one of his GitHub repos showing the balance changes that were being introduced to PTR. And that is the public test realm server. And you can see that this is where the first kind of change was being made to that Colossus range. And you can see that it has to do with the thermal lance upgrade. And I couldn't tell you exactly why this is wrong, but it kind of just goes to show this is where this was first touched and changed. And you may be wondering, how do you know that this is related to the actual problem and the actual bug that was created? And we'll go over some of the changes that we see that fixed this problem a little bit later on. Now, that was on April 20th. And again, this was not introduced into the live version of the game just yet. It wasn't until July 11th that we have this tweet here from Ollie that says, looks like this, change that was originally a broken local data only patch with Colossus Range +3 instead of +2 is now live. And this is the day that we discovered that the actual patch had been pushed to production. Now, I want to note that he also makes a quick mention that this went live on July 11th. So Ollie is, as far as I could see, the first person that made a mention of this publicly in a kind of public scope that the Colossus Range Bug was identified. So, and according to him, it sounds like the change was made and pushed to live on July 11th. So about 3 days after it was pushed live, this is when Ollie makes his tweet and says, hey, this is currently a problem in production. Now, interestingly enough, that's not actually the time when the broader public community actually learned about this problem, despite the fact that this was well known by maybe some people who were very in touch with what was going on. The Reddit post actually came out on July 22nd that kind of blew up, and people really became a lot more publicly aware of things on July 22nd. This also prompted some reaction videos from people like Hearthstone on July 23rd as well, kind of just propagating out that information. But I do want to quickly note, again, we'll talk a bit more about the timeline for all of this, that there was a 3-day gap between the patch actually being pushed out and the bug being noticed by, as far as I could tell, anyone whatsoever. And then 11 days between the patch going live and the broader community realizing what was going on. And also worth mentioning that even just during those 11 or 12 days, we saw various premier level tournaments such as GSL and whatnot being played with this patch at play. So the Colossus simply had a incorrect range during top level competitive games at like the highest level. And now, of course, more recently, going from July 22nd, where the community at large found out about this information, to August 22nd, so about a month later, we ended up seeing that the patch fixing the Colossus Range Bug was introduced. And you can see here, I have a similar line. If you actually go look back on the video that I have, if you're really curious about this, that this is basically, as far as I could tell, ready to be told that I'm wrong, because this is certainly not my area of expertise, is reading these XML changes for how the StarCraft 2 mods and stuff are detailed. But this is where I see a revert being made of the earlier change that looked like it was introduced in the Colossus Range Bug. And this seemed to have been the fix as far as I could tell. Now, basically, a TLDR on this is that between April 20th of when the bug was introduced to PTR to the bug being introduced to production in the live environment where everyone else was playing, this is 70 days between those two time periods. So 70 days where the patch was on PTR and no one really noticed. I think that's something that I do want to talk a bit about in terms of how difficult it is to test a game with the complexity of StarCraft. And I think that, again, going back to process, I'm not blaming any individual people. I don't think pro players or the people implementing these changes or anything should be the ones at fault here. But we do have a process issue right now with how we're handling testing in a very complex system. There's a very good reason why generally companies at large, the most massive companies in the world, spend absurd amounts of money trying to minimize bugs that get pushed to production. And that still ends up happening, but there are processes for how these are handled. Now, 70 days, we weren't able to find this before this patch was pushed live. It took an additional 3 days for this to be seemingly be noticed by anyone. And 11 days total before the community at large actually noticed this bug. And it took 36 days of this bug just basically being out there and directly influencing the balance of the game and the way that things are played. 36 days before this was fixed. And to me, that's a really long time. And I think that is the number that really scares me, because I think that it's important to note, it feels like right now we are operating in a world where we may be able to, as a community, whether it be the pro players or the modders or just the community in general, propose changes and have a patch that is ready to be pushed in like many aspects. In theory, a hotfix could be made, but it takes a fair amount of time for any changes that we submit to Blizzard to actually be implemented. As an example, as far as I could tell, there were already fixes almost on the same day that Ollie discovered this on July 14th. He was also proposing hotfixes that could be fixing the issue. And still, it took an additional 33 or so days before any of those kind of changes could actually be pushed out into the production environment where players would actually be able to take advantage of those updates. That to me, again, is scary, that we could have the fixes ready, but we cannot actually act quickly on them. And this is the crux of the issue, I feel like. In a normal environment, I actually feel like these kind of bugs, they're okay. Obviously, it's not great that they happen, but StarCraft and just in general, video games are extremely complicated. StarCraft is extremely complicated. We don't also have a lot of the context for how a lot of these changes have been made in the past, a lot of the historical reasoning why certain things were done the way that they were. So it's incredible how few bugs have been introduced of a large scale, just with the changes that have been made. But we are operating in an abnormal environment. This isn't an environment where in a normal StarCraft world, something breaks and there's a team of people at Blizzard that are ready to revert the change very quickly or throw out a hotfix and say, oh, we really broke our game. Sorry, guys. Let's immediately, within, a couple of days at most turnaround, implement some kind of update that fixes things. I don't think we're operating in that kind of world. And so I feel like that, to me, indicates that we should maybe have a shift in the way that we think about some of the problems that we could be introduced with the changes we're making and how we actually want to approach some of those changes to mitigate risk. Another example that I do want to talk about, which is still an active issue right now, is the shield battery bug. And for those who don't know about this is just to go over a second example of something that not has been gone through its full cycle of everything, but is currently live and is actually, in my opinion, a even bigger issue than the Colossus Range Bug. But the shield battery issue is that right now, if you build a shield battery, you cannot cancel it. You cannot cancel the shield battery. This is actually a core thing that happens in Protoss versus Protoss, where adepts are a very common form of harassment or opening tool to try and get additional scouting information. And also, the way you typically block those adepts from entering your main base in Protoss versus Protoss is you build a shield battery, blocks the adepts and full walls up your main base so the adepts can't get into your main. Shield battery takes longer and takes longer to build and costs the same amount as a pylon. So it is the best structure to block off your wall and prevent the adepts from having the additional time that they maybe need to try and delay things out and force your building to finish. So then you can finally cancel at the end, get most of your minerals back. Right now, you cannot cancel shield batteries that are being built. This, again, is an issue for the reasons I just outlined, but to go over the timeline for how this issue has come about, as far as I could tell, August 1st, you guys can see in the link that I have here, or the image that I have pulled up, that the shield battery cancel bug was pushed to the public test realm while making other changes for various potential bug fixes to shield batteries. So this, as far as I could tell, is the line, and this is not my area of expertise, so I'm ready to be corrected by Ollie or some other random wonderful modders out there that know more about this than I do. But as far as I can tell, this is where those kind of changes got introduced and where the bug originally kind of came from. And I did just want to pull up these sort of patch notes that Ollie also included a screenshot from August 1st for the PTR. And you can see in that it actually specifically has the section for Protoss where the shield battery received a multitude of different changes. And this is again where I want to go back and reiterate that it's not like these changes are being made for absolutely no reason. These are changes being made in order to fix other existing bugs. And I think it's important to note that if you look at a lot of these issues, I think maybe one or two of them, I'm not 100% sure on the full context of, but I think most people won't have heard or know that much about most of these. I think that these are mostly smaller issues that maybe have been around for a long, long time. And maybe in some cases, they haven't been around for a ton of time, but they are fairly innocuous issues that really don't come up very often. And it's through the fixing of these kinds of issues that we have opened ourselves up for the risk of a much larger issue popping up that directly affects a lot of gameplay right now, such as shield batteries not being able to be canceled. Now, the timeline for things, this is on August 1st, this was pushed to public test realm. On August 22nd, as far as I could tell, the next update was made, and this shield battery cancel bug was introduced into the live version of StarCraft 2. Now, I do want to make a mention that, and I'll make a mention of this and show you guys the tweets or the message specifically from Ollie, but it seems like this was something, I don't know the full context on this. Ollie would probably have a better explanation for what was going on, especially with this comment here on this, but it sounded like this was an issue that didn't appear maybe in some scenarios during the testing phase of things, but appeared when things were online versus local. I'm not 100% sure what was going on with that, but it seemed like this shield battery cancel bug was hard to reproduce in some situations, which is why it was difficult to catch. But regardless, this is kind of where that same line of code gets pushed into the live version of StarCraft on August 22nd. Now, thankfully, this is a very, unfortunately, this is a very noticeable bug. And again, I mentioned how, in some ways, unlike the Colossus bug, this is very, very impactful to the current state of StarCraft. And so on the same day, this bug does get reported by the community. Ollie does make a mention of this and includes this screenshot on an issue that exists, showcasing that there is no cancel button on the shield battery and no hotkeys don't work on this either. And also the stop button does not exist. And this is kind of, again, where he makes a mention of online things like that versus the editor tests that were made. It's important to note also that in this message, that there is a mention of the potential fix that is mentioned further down below. But I think what is still alarming to me is that there's a mention of the fix that could be made, but also a statement saying, I do not understand the root of the issue, but this fixes it online and in editor tests. If you're a developer, that's not exactly it's a little scary, but it's not exactly the most uncommon thing to happen, right? Where something breaks and you figure out something that fixes it, but you're not 100% sure why that's fixing it. And it's not until later that you kind of finally understand maybe what's going on with that. The reason why this is scary to me, though, is, again, putting in the context of we don't have a lot of control, it feels like, over the speed of how quickly hotfixes are being introduced into the game. If we need to fast follow on a patch, I don't necessarily know when we get to do that. And that, to me, is, again, a very scary thing. If we don't understand how this is fixing the root of the issue, I'm a little bit afraid that it's potentially introducing additional issues, or because it's not fixing the root of the issue, something else even more sinister is underneath the surface of this kind of fix. And if we introduce this kind of fix that we don't actually understand, we will be left with an even more messed up situation, or a different kind of messed up situation. That is the thing that kind of scares me right now about the process of how we're going through and patching the game. My suggestion, and the thing that I actually want to talk about, is that right now there are a bunch of different patch ideas that are being proposed right now that are currently on the PTR that got introduced with this latest patch. And I want to make a note that not all of these things are high risk. I think there is a notable difference, and it's a subtle difference that I think is a little bit up for interpretation. But some of these changes, as I think some of the modders and stuff have actually been pointing out on Twitter and such, they aren't really high risk changes. There's things like changing number values, such as imagine changing the acceleration or deceleration of unit. Yeah, there is maybe some room for potential that does break something and causes another bug, or maybe causes a balance issue. But it's probably a lower risk issue. There's a lower likelihood of that changing things. There are higher risk issues being introduced, though, as well. Things such as massive unit reworks of how the Cyclone operates. We're fundamentally changing a lot of core aspects about the Cyclone. There are big things being changed about the mothership in the proposed patch. We're moving things from energy base to cooldown base. We're changing the way that interactions happen, and a really well-meaning and fundamentally awesome change of the Immortal and how that reacts to EMP, and how right now in the current live version of StarCraft versus the PTR version, in the live version, if you EMP an Immortal, the shields get removed and then the barrier activates. That's an order of operations thing as opposed to just a simple numbers change. You're changing the way that units interact. The PTR is making it so that the barrier gets activated, then the EMP does its damage. Fundamentally, at a core level, I don't actually have an issue with that change. That's a great change. That's a bug fix. And it's one that is really great to see in most situations. But it is, in my mind, an example of a higher risk than just a simple number change. And it's, again, not to say that I don't think we should make this Immortal change, but I do think that, especially with the changes that are being made in these bigger balance change updates, I feel like we need to be really mindful and maybe introduce a bit more process into how much risk are we taking with the changes that are being made. How much risk are we taking on by making changes that fundamentally affect the way that core game units or logic is interacting with other units and in ways that are very hard to test. And I think basically there's two aspects to this. There's one, which is how high of a risk are we willing to take on a lot of these changes when we don't have the ability to quickly follow up and patch things and fix things. The second part is the testing. Testing right now, it's there, but I don't actually, and I know that, of course, again, I want to reiterate, Blameless Culture, I'm not blaming any individual people. I really want to make that clear. It's the process that I think we should look at and see if we can improve on more than anything else. But right now, testing does feel a little bit difficult. As far as I'm aware, right now, and I'm really grateful that I feel like this is a change from the previous patches that have been dropped on us in the past. There is a mod that people can load up and try out these changes on. Already with that mod, I think people have found other random issues or potential bugs and stuff that I've been seeing reported on Twitter, tweeting to like Alex007 and things along those lines, which is great to see. We're catching more stuff because people are going and testing things. But even with that, we are very aware that there's not going to be the full-throated testing that maybe we would all like to see, because there's not really a lot of advantages to it. It's volunteer work for absolutely for free. The only advantage that you get is that maybe you catch some bugs and then we don't have to worry about them as a community in the future. I don't really have a great solution to this, but it's clear that right now we have a process issue where testing is not done thoroughly, and it's not because anyone is at fault. It's not because, oh man, like these lazy pro players or these, modders who are not paying attention when they're making these changes. It's really difficult to test and find all of the different ways that these changes can affect unit interactions, the way that they can affect the game. And simply put, we are not well staffed nor knowledgeable enough on this code base to just make these changes very, very safely, the same way that Blizzard did. And yeah, Blizzard did introduce bugs in the past, but really freaking impressed with how few core critical issues really made it ever through StarCraft. Very few in its long, long lifespan. If anyone has any ideas, I would love to hear them, and I would love to see more discussion around ways that we can minimize the risk if we want to make bigger changes like this. I think this is a critical discussion we need to have of how can we mitigate the risk? How can we reduce the issues? I think things like the PTR test tournament is a great idea that I think Wardy is going to be running one of those. And I think the fact that we have a version of the game that is going to be the future patch playable is a really, really big, important benefit of compared to previous patches. My biggest advice or suggestion is that not just for big balance changes, but just in general, if we are going to have an upcoming patch, getting all hands on deck with the community and saying, hey, we're making these bug fixes and we're releasing a mod. I know that it's not going to have the same appeal as a big balance change that fewer people are going to go and play around with and test, but at least opening it up to the community as opposed to keeping it secluded to the small group of pro players that are involved in the balance council, I feel like is going to be a massive plus. Anyways, I'm sure that this video has already gone way longer than it really needed to.